this tradition started some time ago, and it might have even been tied to a very popular book a couple decades ago that people read called Confederates in the Attic by Tony Horwitz. And Horwitz visited Shiloh to write his book about driving around the country and visiting Civil War sites and meeting people and so on and so forth. And when he came to Shiloh, he got it through his mind that he wanted to go to Fraley Field at 5 in the morning and be at the site where the first shots were fired those many years ago. And this was, what, 97, 98, when he wrote that book. And he wrote about it. He's a good writer, so it's fun to read the chapter. And got up, went to Waffle House, got some eggs before dawn, and drove out to Fraley Field. Walked out there figuring to be all alone, and found a whole bunch of people. Found a whole bunch of people already standing out in Fraley Field. And I have a feeling when the folks at the park picked up that book and read it, they went, "What? They're doing what?" Maybe they were already doing stuff like that. Maybe this wasn't a surprise, but I like to imagine that. Not too many years after that, the park decided, well, if you all are going to be getting up at 3:30 in the morning and showing up at our park at 4:55 in the morning in Fraley Field, in the most remote field, in the most remote part of remote West Tennessee, if only for safety's sake, we should probably put a ranger there. And then in the meantime, we can tell you about what happened. The idea that we can come back on the anniversary of the battle, on the day of the battle, at the time of the action, to be here ourselves and talk about that action. We're going to get all sorts there's obviously a commemorative aspect to that. We want to remember the soldiers who served here and the people who died here fighting for their cause. And we also we want to physically be in the spot in Tennessee in April in this area. We're going to get an idea what the landscape was like. We're going to get an idea what the environment was like. We're going to get an idea what the woods were like. In some cases we have to correct that idea because the woods back then were a lot more wide open than they are now. There's a lot of underbrush now. But being here on the day gives us an idea of the environment in which these actions happen, the environment in which this battle happened. And as we learned earlier today, was it really this cold on the day of the battle? It was pretty cold on the day of the battle. It was pretty cold on April 7th, and when the Union troops marched across this field and the Confederate troops retreated across this field fighting, they did it in an environment that felt rather like the one we're experiencing here today. And then we can talk about they had different shoes. They didn't have good shoes like we did. They had good warm clothes, and they're carrying those muskets and they're fighting and they're underweight and a lot of them are ill, and we can start to get a feel. We can start to get a feel and appreciate what their life was like, and that will help us to appreciate these monuments all the more. That's the reason they came back all those years later to place these monuments on the field where they fought. So that's just a little opening to thank you for coming out on a cold day to learn about the Battle of Shiloh. I hope that by coming out yourselves on a cold day and experiencing the battlefield, you'll learn even a little bit more than whatever little bit I can teach by narrating the events that occurred. You brought yourself here, and you're going to get the experience of what it's like to walk the field. It's very important to do that, to experience the battlefield. So on the afternoon of April 7th, 1862, the Confederate Army under General P.G.T. Beauregard. His boss, Albert Sidney Johnston, having been killed in the fighting of the previous day, found his army in the camps of General U.S. Grant's Army of the Tennessee. They had conquered those camps the day before by attacking at dawn, doing their best to drive around the left flank, the east flank of the enemy, doing their best to try to drive them away from the Tennessee River and north toward the swamps of Snake Creek and Owl Creek. The Confederate Army was in the Union camp. They had driven all the way to the deep ravines of Dill Branch and Tillman Branch that were the final protection of the Union soldiers who had been driven from their camps and made their final stand at Pittsburg Landing in front of those ravines. These Confederate soldiers had spent the night in the camps while their commanders, General Beauregard, General Polk, General Hardee, General Bragg, General Breckinridge, thought about how they would finish the battle the next day. Principally General Beauregard, General P.G.T. Beauregard, the Creole general, thought about how they would finish off the enemy the next day. The last they saw of the Union Army the night before, they had captured, the Confederates had captured 2,200 Federal soldiers in the Hornet's Nest and seen most of the rest of Grant's army retreating in confusion to Pittsburg Landing. They had sent 2 brigades to try to attack that position, but those brigades were driven back by the massed artillery at Grant's last line. The last they had seen of the Union Army before the sun went down was confusion. And demoralization. They themselves were disorganized, but not demoralized. And the Confederate armies fell back. The Confederate army fell back from those ravines to camp in the Union camps during the night. During that night, all through these camps, the Confederate soldiers were in them. You can imagine some of them eating the Yankee rations or sacking the sutler shops of the various Union regiments, finding themselves some cheese and sardines to feast on for the first time in a long time. Every 15 minutes or so, Union gunboats in the Tennessee River would hurl huge shells into the camps, and they would explode at random around the landscape. The Confederates got used to them. Some of the Confederates went as far as 5 miles back to bivouac at the place where they had bivouacked the night before. There they had left their supply wagons. There they had left their knapsacks or whatever else that they had that they carried their stuff with them. They slept in their own blankets for the night. On the morning of April 7th, when the sun started to come up, a gray day like this one, General Beauregard and the Confederates found themselves confronted with a well-organized, well-supplied, reinforced Union Army. Not at all ready to surrender as soon as the Confederates came back and confronted them again at their last line. In fact, a strong, reinforced Union Army ready to counterattack and take the battle to the Confederates. So the fighting through the morning of April 7th, 1862 was characterized by a slow and conservative Union assault, moving slowly like a steamroller down through those ravines and up the other side. Every time those formations of bluecoats reached a point where their lines of battle were broken up, perhaps by the terrain, perhaps by the woods, or perhaps by some deep ravine, they stopped, they reorganized, they touched their flanks, they got ready for the new plan, and then they moved ahead again. And every time they moved ahead, Confederates had to fall back again. General Beauregard found that he would not be attacking on April 7th to take the last of the Yankees prisoners. In fact, he would spend April 7th defending against a Union assault. Now, there's a characteristic of the fighting on April 7th that we're going to run into studying all of the battlefield on April 7th, but we're also going to run into it in this program when we talk about the fighting around the Crossroads. And that is this. The characteristic of the second day's battle is an offensive by a larger, fresher Union army moving south and west against the Confederates. The fighting of that battle is characterized by the Confederates continually punching and attacking the attacking Union army. So time and again throughout this day, when you're reading the history or doing a program like this, you're going to be thinking in terms of that the Federals are moving in the attack across the battlefield, but right now what appears to be happening is that the Confederates are charging. The Confederates are charging and driving back some part of the Union line. And that is a characteristic of the battle. General Beauregard fought this defensive battle by continually attacking his enemy. Attacking him here, attacking him there. Now, is this a good question to ask is this a strategy that General Beauregard planned to apply? And the answer is going to be yes and no. It's not a bad strategy. A good offense is a pretty good defense. But what I think it's going to demonstrate is also that during the course of the day, General Beauregard slowly begins to understand that the tables have turned. I do not think that General Beauregard woke up at dawn, looked at those Yankee columns over there and said, oh no, now we have to defend because they're attacking. General Beauregard and his commanders and his soldiers, I think they woke up on the 7th day of April, looked at the Union troops coming across the ravines and said, let's go, let's beat these guys. Let's beat these guys and let's finish the job. If they wanted to send some reinforcements in, that's just more fish for the net. We'll get them all. I think the Confederates entered into this battle with a high degree of morale and motivation. And even after the bloody fighting of the first day, I think the Confederates were motivated to grasp and seize the fruits of victory. They had paid dearly for this victory, and I think the Confederates were determined to get it. Now, during the course of the day, as the Federals drive the Confederates back, that attitude is probably going to change. That attitude probably changed to, okay, we're definitely going to have to defend. After that, we're definitely going to have to fall back. After that, we're definitely, and then finally in the afternoon, we're definitely going to have to retreat. We're going to have to get out of here before the whole army falls apart. But a tactical characteristic of the Confederate defense throughout the day is attack. Attack. An attack with a lot of morale and a lot of motivation that shows that they think that they can win and they intend to win the battle. Thus, where this happens, we see very bloody fighting. We see some episodes of very bloody fighting. We see the bloody fighting occurring in the same places. Now that's an overall characteristic, I think, a characteristic description of the second day's battle. Where are we right now, and what are we about to talk about? We're about to talk about the fighting at what became the most critical point on the battlefield. In fact, on both days of the battle, April 6th and April 7th, the area that we're going to look at was the most critical point of the battlefield. Both armies were willing to expend blood and energy to capture this point. Both armies were facing very dire circumstances should they lose this point at this time. And as suggested by the name of our program, that critical point is a crossroads. A crossroads, a place where two important roads going to different places on the landscape meet. That crossroads are the crossroads of the main road from Pittsburg Landing to Corinth, Mississippi, crossing the road from Hamburg, Tennessee to Purdy, Tennessee. Two main thoroughfares. They're country roads, frontier roads, but for a frontier, two main thoroughfares leading to important places. Purdy's a county seat. Hamburg is the most important landing on the river. Pittsburg Landing is a secondary landing on the river, and Corinth is a major important railroad crossroads. So these two roads are very important roads. And to defend the confluence of those roads, right down here, both sides, to defend or take the connection of those roads, both sides would expend a lot of energy and a lot of blood. At those roads, a pond. Today we see it right behind us. It's called Water Oaks Pond. That's part of the landscape that is not the same as it was 156 years ago. Now, 156 years ago, there was a pond there. But as suggested by its name, Water Oaks Pond, 156 years ago, that pond was more of a swamp, a morass, overgrown with young water oak, young post oak, vines, thorns, bushes, an impenetrable thicket leading into a wet, low basin pond. A very difficult part of the battlefield to traverse. Even one person trying to move through it would probably ruin his day. He'd ruin his shoes, he'd ruin his pants. But also, it's a place that's very difficult to get through. It's also a very place, will prove to be a very difficult place to get people out of if they decide they want to stay there. So the crossroads are crucial. The point of Water Oaks is a very defensible strong point, and the Hamburg and Purdy Road is a natural line of defense that the Confederates used in the afternoon of April 7th to make a stand. To make a stand that they intend to keep. Now we're going to meet some of the Union participants in the attack on the point of Water Oaks a little bit later. But now that we've sort of framed the discussion, framed the program, let's get to walking. Let's get our blood moving. And we're going to do that by walking from here straight down to the crossroads. Okay? Let's go. Yeah. I've thought about it. I've thought about it a lot. I do think, and the couple of things kind of constrain the idea of what it is. First, the roads were here. So, of course, that was kept open in the areas adjacent to the road. Kept open as much as they could. We also have defending down here. We have the position that Rutledge battery. So, you see that right ahead. Well, you got to ask yourself, why would Rutledge be there if he was just pointing into the back? Car, clear the road. But with that in mind, it's probably clear that the Crossroads. Arkansas, just put his corpse right in the middle of it. Just sat there in the pond the rest of the thing. I've never considered this spot that much. Wallace. Was with probably more than 10,000 men to strike this defensive position. And within 30 minutes, closer to 20 minutes, these two lines of battle, the lines of battle commemorated by these monuments here to Illinois regiments, and that Iowa battery, versus these very heavy columns of Confederates coming from the woods there and there, struck this crossroads. And in about 20 minutes, you saw some of the bloodiest fighting of the Civil War. You saw some of the bloodiest fighting of the Civil War. You can talk about other places on other battlefields like the Wheat Field at Gettysburg or Bloody Lane at Antietam or any of these other places, and the Crossroads at 10 in the morning of April 6, 1862 are one of those places. One of those places in American history where in a very short period of time, probably 15 or 20 minutes, people were just slaughtered. They were just piled up along these lines. And the Confederate attack carried those men, carried the survivors across the Woolf Field, across through Water Oaks Pond, and into the woods beyond. An hour later, the Federals, having reorganized and rallied, counterattacked, drove the Confederates back across this land again in very bloody fighting, occurring just an hour after the previous slaughter that occurred here. And then finally, the Confederates rallied and reorganized and got their force together and pushed the Federals back for the final time, back across this field. The reason I tell the story of the fighting at April 6, 1862, in the morning at the Crossroads, to let you know how bloody it was and what a terrific slaughter it was, is so that you understand when we talk about the fighting on April 7th, 1862, all those dead men and all those wounded men from the other day are still lying under our feet. The fighting happens over and around the bodies of the men who died the day before. Such is the importance of this crossroads, that for both days' battle, it becomes a critical point on the landscape. So, at 10 o'clock in the morning of April 7th, General Bragg, in command of the Confederates who are defending the first Confederate line in the Jones Field, began to fall back. Is there anybody with us here that was on the Lew Wallace hike earlier this morning? Let me see your hands if you're on the Lew Wallace hike. Okay. So why did the Confederates fall back from that line, Lew Wallace people? Because Lew Wallace and his Union division got on their flank and turned their flank, and they had to fall back from that line. So the first Confederate line, the line where they had first attempted to attack and finish off the Yankees was down there in Jones Field. Then they had to defend that line. Finally, Wallace flanked them, and they fell back to this position. The Confederates had fought the Federals to a standstill until Wallace went around their flank, and then they had to fall back. Finally, the Confederates at about noon got to this position, or they got here earlier than that, maybe 11. But between 10 and noon, the Confederates got to this position and began to deploy along the hamburg-purdy road. General Beauregard knew that they had to defend this position. It was an important one. General Beauregard himself had his headquarters back at the Shiloh Church, just down that road. He continued to send troops forward. He had a lot of problems with straggling by that time, but he would rally the stragglers and he would send them forward. He would form casual units, casual detachments, and you get together, and then you put them in charge of a staff officer, and the staff officer would take them forward. Confederates were going forward, not knowing the man on their right and not knowing the man on their left, but still rushing forward to the battle line to fight the Federals as they came across here. And so this is the defensive station that Generals McCook and Sherman and McClernand and Wallace face at about noon, when they finally pushed down through the Jones Field and the camps of McClernand's 2nd Brigade, and then across from the east and from the northeast, McCook's division pushing across the review field in this area. They find a very strong Confederate line along the hamburg-purdy road, and then of course they find a very strong thicket, very strong position in a thicket in a pond just across that road. All right, let's head down the road here. Let's wait for our friends to get by, and we'll cross the other side of the road, head down the road until we get to the review field area.
Those are my trucks.
Okay, we follow that road and imagine that it does not work.
good open place, and he said, no, I was close to it. He said, when Greg told me he saw it, he was in that side. I think he's going to hit it. No,
Well, because the sun was right here, so it didn't seem like this drove
but they go fishing all the time. He shouldn't do it sometimes.
On the, in my opinion, on the Shiloh battlefield. It was a monument to the 77th Pennsylvania Infantry. The only regiment of infantry from Pennsylvania to participate in the Battle of Shiloh. As a matter of trivia, if anybody ever says only one Pennsylvania unit was at Shiloh, as a matter of trivia, you can always tell one of the batteries of regular artillery, Terrell's battery, was entirely recruited in Reading, Pennsylvania. So there are two Pennsylvania units at Shiloh. It just except one of them is a regular Army unit staffed entirely by Pennsylvanians. The other is a Pennsylvania Volunteer Regiment of Infantry, the 77th. Now the 77th fought in this area on the afternoon of April 7th. When they did so, they arrived fairly late in the fighting. They were detached from their brigade and sent across this field and then moved into a large open field over there. So I want to direct your attention to the other side of the road, and you can see an area of the Shiloh battlefield that is called, and I like this name, Lost Field. When you look at the map and you see Lost Field, where's Lost Field? Those woods are Lost Field. So at the time of the battle, that was an open field over there. And that's one of the places that's grown up over the years. So the 77th Pennsylvania, in connection with some other units, attacked across Review Field into Lost Field. By that time, Confederate units that had been fighting further down this road were starting to retreat to the south and the west. The Federals in Buell's army, who had been attacking over there, had started to drive, by attrition, drive those people back. And also, every time General Wallace outflanked the west flank of the Confederate line, and the whole line had to fall back, those people had to fall back. And as they fell back, the line contracted. Casualties were heavy. The Confederates simply couldn't cover the entire battlefield anymore, and so they had to consolidate around the most important features on the battlefield. One of the most important features was Crossroads. So think of all the Confederates, many of the Confederates that are fighting down on this end of the road are retreating to the south, but also to the west, to reorganize in places like Lost Field and try to recover there. During the attack by the 77th Pennsylvania Regiment in this area, that they encountered Confederate Colonel Joel Battle, commander of the 20th Tennessee Regiment, monument there was very attractive they're good buddies. They're about to shake hands. Have a great moment. But it's a very symbolic bas-relief. Here, battle is handing his sword. Here's the 77th Pennsylvania. They've got their muskets. They've got their flags. Here are the men who are surrendering with Colonel Battle. They don't have their muskets. They're down on the ground, and their heads are like that. Very imaginative bas-relief, and I like it. It's really beautiful. Not good history, really. Not exactly the way it happened. But the Pennsylvanians did attack through here. They did capture Colonel Battle. The vast majority of the 20th Tennessee got away. So that part's not exactly true, except those men of the 20th who became killed and wounded on the battlefield. But as you look down here, you're going to see the area where the strong Confederate defense started to thin out. Because all of the Confederates, as they fell back, again they had to fall back to the south and to the west, gather around the most critical points, such as Crossroads or the Shiloh Church, where they would make their stand in the afternoon. So by the afternoon, by this time, well, it must be getting close to 3, right? By 3 in the afternoon, General Beauregard would definitely have known this is the battle of us defending. The best we've got, and probably we're pretty close to having to retreat out of here. And when we retreat, we have to get away with what we got. Therefore, as you look down here, you're going to see an area where Confederate defenses start to thin out and start to become a little less dangerous, a little less bloody, and the fighting is a little less bloody. The casualties of the 77th Pennsylvania were really quite low. From the 77th Pennsylvania. Down here we see a 3 obelisk-shaped monument to Indiana regiments. Those are Indiana regiments that came from the Army of the Ohio. General Buell's army joined the last attack of the day and drove right on through, basically into a vacuum, with very few Confederates in front of them. They lost very few men. They got to say they participated in the Battle of Shiloh in the best way, because none of them got hurt in doing it.
The 40th Indiana didn't take any kids.
What?
The 40th Indiana?
Oh yeah, 40th Indiana got goose eggs for casualties, but they still got the same monument as 32nd Indiana did, with over 100 hits. But good for them. Hey, I wasn't there. They were all there. Yeah, they all lived, but they showed up and they did their jobs. But that is something I want to point out. By coming to this point, we've reached the point where we've reached a boundary, a phase line, if you will, of where the Confederate resistance died out. And the Confederate resistance would be in the late afternoon, would be much lighter over there and intensely heavy over here. And the reason we're walking around over here is so that we can figure out why that was the case. So let's take our next walk, which is straight across the review field to the Corinth Road. excitement, a little realism in the experience.
Very bony forest over there.
What's that?
It's a very bony forest.
Oh, is it? Go to the buzzard. Here are the buzzards close by. When you come over, when you come through the field early on a warm morning, it can be heavy. The mist hangs all the way over it. There's always turkeys out there in the field. Quite often, oh, really? In the park? Oh, right around here. Did they do a deer census while you were here?
I'm not doing me and a dude. We were out here at night, and they saw it had to be 80 deer and jumped to it.
Okay.
So the herd is healthy.
Yeah.
And they're healthy, but they're healthy because all of them, you know.
Yeah.
No skin and bone.
Uh-huh.
My son a history lecture this morning.
Huh?
I my son a history lecture.
Yeah.
That's my favorite place. That was it.
198 members of the 4th Tennessee. And we walked right over where they were. And then they moved into the woods, and they attacked, and the tablet right there. So they attacked the flank, and they're going to be there. Yep. Don't fire, they're our friends. Don't fire, they're our friends. They walk right over. Fog of war. Well, they call it the fog of war. It's literally the smoke from the blue smoke from the gunfire hanging between the battle lines. They can fool you. We're only about halfway. I only stopped so that we could catch our breath. We're gonna. We're across the road and right up this whole road until we get to the headquarters line. McCook's division of Buell's army, when Buell was advancing more to the south, McCook was under orders to follow the road. Or at least he was under his own orders to follow the road. Don't know what General Buell thought about it. But McCook began to march to the southwest, while most of Buell's men marched to the south. It wasn't a big deal while they were close together. Back there by the Hornet's Nest area. But as the morning turned to the afternoon turned to the late afternoon, and McCook began advancing down the Pittsburg Landing to Corinth Road, his division became disattached from the rest of Buell's army, and General Buell had to rush to find other troops that could fill that gap. Now, If you want to ask why did General McCook advance at an oblique angle to the rest of his army, there are a couple of answers, a couple of easy answers. One is he was following the road. Two, the road led him to the fight. The crossroads are where the Confederates were.